But then he immediately considered tea. Had he could let Aura guide him. There was a more pressing problem before him at the moment. Damn. They might think it's not the wise king of the forest, and even if I bring it back to Nazarick, I need some proof of having beaten it. Should I cut off one of its legs? Ains-sama. Narbrel's gaze was far afield, looking at the mighty shadow that emerged from the distant trees. There was no way to make its shape out, because it was hiding behind the trees, and without the sun to light it, there was no way to tell if its body was, in fact, silver. Has our guest arrived? Or maybe we're the guests, Ains idly mused as he stepped up in front of Narbrel. He had no idea of how strong it was, what level it was, so Ains made the logical decision of putting himself in front of the magic caster Narbrel, who was not suited to melee combat. Once he got in front of Narbrel, Ains felt the air move. He immediately crossed his greatswords in front of him like a shield. He heard something like the sound of steel meeting steel, and a tremendous force bore down on Ains' arms. A weighty and swift object had struck the greatswords Ains was holding. He saw a long, serpentine tail slowly retreat behind a tree. Its tail attacks like a bullwhip. However, judging by the feel and sound of the impact, that tail must be as hard as metal. Its attack radius of over 20 meters will be hard to deal with, but how does it live with a tail like that? With no frontliner skills, Ains had no idea how to deal with it. All he could do was advance into melee with his foe. Ains sighed. Of course, this was just going through the motions, since Ains had no lungs. He braced his shoulders into a battle stance, ready to counterattack. In response to this, a serene bass voice boomed out from the forest. How spectacular! To think thou could endure the blow of this one. Perhaps this is the first time this one hath encountered a foe possessed of such prowess. Thou, this one. Ains' illusory face hardened, and then he considered that those words had already been translated. Ains decided that this was the closest equivalent to what had actually been said. Then, O trespasser upon mine domain. Shouldst thou decide to quit the field, this one shall not pursue thee, in honor of thine magnificent defense, what say thee? What a foolish question. Of course I plan to defeat you for my own gain. Speaking of which, are you so insecure about your appearance that you have to hide in the shadows? Or are you shy by nature? What a wild tongue thou hast, O trespasser. Now behold this one's mighty form. Stare with eyes wide and tongue-tied, and tremble in dread and awe. The wise king of the forest slowly emerged from the trees, revealing its body to him. As he saw it, Ains' illusionary eyes went wide. Fufufu, this one senses thy fear and alarm from beneath thine helmet. A smile twisted the face of the magical beast, and it curled its long tail. There were strange glyphs and symbols on the silvery fur covering its body. It was about the size of a horse, but it was low to the ground, being larger in the horizontal rather than the vertical dimension. The wise king of the forest shrank the distance between them. What is this? An indescribable feeling washed over Ains. After becoming undead, all the strong emotions he felt were immediately suppressed. With that in mind, this was probably not a very strong emotion. Even so, he had not felt this in a long time, including his time in Yggdrasil, the sensation when a monster appeared before him. I have a question. What is the name of your species? This one is known in thy tongue as the wise king of the forest. Apart from that, this one holds no other titles. Ains gulped, and then asked further, your species, might they be called Jungarian hamsters? The wise king of the forest. From what Ains could see, it closely resembled a Jungarian hamster. Its fur was silvery, or rather, snow-white, contrasted by its black, round eyes, and its body looked like a gigantic bun. Of course, hamsters did not have such long tails, not did they grow larger than a human being. However, those two factors aside, he honestly could not think of any other animal which could compare. Fully 100 out of 100 people would agree that it was a hamster. Well, a giant Jungarian hamster. Maybe a mutant Jungarian hamster, or something like that. It tilted its adorable head, it did not seem to have a neck, and the wise king of the forest sniffed at the air before speaking again. This one hath lived in solitude all mine life. This one canst not answer thee, for this one knowst not of this one's, or dost thou imply that thou knowst of this one's species? I guess, sort of, one of my former friends once kept a creature which was similar to you. Ains recalled that friend of his, and how that friend had not logged on to Yggdrasil for about a week, because that friend's pet Jungarian hamster had died. Behind him, Narbril quietly went, oh, probably because she had learned something about one of the 41 supreme beings. What? To think beings like this one would be raised as pets. The wise king of the forest puffed up its cheeks. Ains had no idea whether it was unhappy, or trying to intimidate him, or something else. The only thing Ains could be sure of was that it was definitely not eating. This one prays thee enlighten me on that matter. This one is a living being and must procreate. If others of this one's breed exist, then this one must go forth and multiply, lest this one become a failure as a living being. According to the wise king of the forest's logic, Ains, who could not reproduce, was unfit to be a living being. As he clung to the excuse that he was undead and not, in fact, a living creature, Ains weakly answered, it wasn't as big as you anyway. Be that as it may, perchance it was a juvenile? No, even fully grown, it was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. With a vague sense of sadness, the wise king of the forest's whiskers drooped down. Indeed, that is quite a stretch. This one must pass the years in solitude, after all. If you were a more impressive-looking species it wouldn't be so bad, but you're a hamster. I do sympathize with your circumstances, but if there were others like you, your numbers would increase without end and the world might end up being destroyed. The wise king of the forest twitched its whiskers. While its eyes were the same shiny black as always, there seemed to be some anger in its tone. What an outrage. Increasing the numbers of one's species is important. And this one hath lived without companionship all mine life. 'Tis only natural to desire others of mine kind. Oh, well, that's certainly true, forgive me, I misspoke. Ains recalled his comrades from Ains' Ulgaun and apologized. Although he felt terribly mixed up about remembering his friends after being lectured by a hamster, and then apologizing to it. Think not of it. This one grants thee mine forgiveness. Then, let us abandon this idle banter, and show each other our fatal resolve. Listen well, O trespasser who hath profaned mine domain, offer thy life as this one's sustenance. Ains felt his motivation draining away. Even if that cute appearance was just a facade, he still could not bring himself to fight it in earnest. No matter how you looked at it, having the ruler of the great tomb of Nazarick duel a giant hamster was just sad. Even if he defeated it, he would have to take the corpse of a Jungarian hamster, and tell people, this is the wise king of the forest, the fight was too intense and I couldn't chase it away. How would adventurers, including the Swords of Darkness, view that? Even in the best-case scenario, they would simply look silently at Ains with pitying eyes. In that case, he would not defeat the wise king of the forest, but capture it alive to pick its brains. Nabe, fall back, Ains said, forcing some semblance of fighting spirit back into himself as he gave that order. Narbril had a look of absolute confidence in Ains' victory on her face, as she bowed deeply, and then retreated to a corner of the clearing. Oh, but know thou that being outnumbered is no handicap for this one? I can't do something as embarrassing as fighting a hamster 2-on-1. After hearing those words and seeing Ains raise his weapons in a fighting stance, the wise king of the forest lowered its body and tensed its entire body. Regret not thy decision. Now bear the charge of this one. The massive body forcefully kicked off the earth with a mighty bang, and lunged at Ains. The flying tackle of the wise king of the forest's massive body would have tossed any ordinary person away, had they been hit by it without using a martial art. However, Ains used the blades of his greatswords as a shield, and took the wise king of the forest's charge head-on. Despite its fearsome destructive power, Ains still easily resisted it. Moo! The wise king of the forest was surprised by the unmoving Ains, and slashed with the surprisingly sharp claws on its forepaws. Ains raised the greatsword in his left hand to block the strike, and swung with the greatsword in his right. He did not put his full strength into it, but it was still quite a forceful blow. There was a loud crash, and Ain's strike was deflected away, his arm numbed from the impact. It would seem the wise king of the forest had blocked Ain's strike with its claws, and the two attacks had bounced apart after an intense mid-air clash. Well done. But how about this? Charm species. Mind-affecting effects were useless against the undead. Ignoring his opponent's magical attack, Ain swung both his greatswords. There was a sound of clashing metal again, and Ain's swords were deflected once more. Ains narrowed his eyes under his helmet. While that had only been a probing attack, the wise king of the forest had deflected that strike with its skin. It would seem that its hide was harder than most metals. Was it not soft and fluffy fur? It was quite surprising, but Ains chased away these thoughts which had no place in a battle. Ain's physical attack power would be around that of a level 30 warrior, in Yggdrasil terms. However, that was greatly affected by spells and equipment, so he could not be sure. Still, with that as a baseline, the wise king of the forest had the fighting power of a level 30 or so character. A frown grew on the illusory face under Ain's helmet. Not bad, very suitable for melee combat training. Ains was certain that as long as he went all out, he could definitely defeat this opponent. Although he had to stay alert, it was still good practice for being a frontliner. Ains continued swinging his twin greatswords, and the wise king of the forest continued its adroit deflection of his blows. Then another glyph on its body lit up, and it cast a spell. Blindness. Unlike the previous charm species, this non-mind-affecting spell of blindness could potentially have affected Ains. However, Ains had a racial skill which rendered him immune to low-tier magic. Therefore, the spell vanished without ever taking effect. A different symbol lit up when it used that spell. It seems the symbols on its body represent the spells it can use. There were spellcasting monsters in Yggdrasil. While the numbers of spells they could use varied greatly according to their level and species, as a rough guideline, they could use about 8 kinds of magic. Similarly, the wise king of the forest had roughly 8 kinds of tattoos on its body, so Ains felt like he was fighting a monster from Yggdrasil. The wise king of the forest did not notice its spell had been resisted, and attacked with its forepaws. Ains blocked with the greatsword in one hand and countered with the greatsword in his other. He thought of past battles alongside his friends. Touch Me, who wielded a sword and shield, and was one of the greatest warriors in Yggdrasil. Nishiki and Rai, who bore the twin Kodachis named Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi, and boasted the highest attack power in the guild. The man also known as No Second Strike, although that was not actually the case, wielding the twin Nodachis known as God-slaying/Emperor and Takamikazuchi Mk8, Warrior Takamikazuchi. And then he recalled the brave man he had encountered recently, Gazef Stranov, the kingdom's warrior captain. Perhaps Ains had traveled to Irantil in the guise of a warrior, because he had been moved by that man. Ains mocked himself for thinking of these things now. I can't let my mind wander in combat. Although there's certainly enough leeway for it, I can't be careless, even if my opponent is a hamster. He imagined the countless sword strokes his companions had made, and Ains attacked continuously, trying his best to reproduce those moves. At the same time, he used the greatsword in his left hand to intercept the wise king of the forest's counterattacks. Both sides went back and forth, neither side being able to strike a decisive blow, until Ain's greatsword finally breached the wise king of the forest's defense. What? The scent of fresh blood followed the sensation of the greatsword piercing into flesh. The greatsword in his right hand grazed the hide of the wise king of the forest, sending hairs flying. He planned to continue his assault with his left-hand greatsword, but the wise king of the forest sensed it was at a disadvantage, and leapt away, landing about 10 meters away from Ains. I've heard hamsters escape their nests by jumping, but I've never seen one retreat before. Just as Ains began losing himself in thought after battling the giant hamster, the wise king of the forest lowered its body. Ains watched his opponent's movements in surprise. What does it plan to do at that range? If it's a charge like just now, then I'll just hold my sword out to let it kill itself, but it's most likely that it's going to use another spell. The wise king of the forest curled its tail up behind it, but judging by its length, it probably shouldn't be able to reach. No, that's not it. Ains realized that he had miscalculated. The tail strike at the beginning had come from a long distance away. In other words, he was still in range of the tail attack. As expected, the tail swung in a huge, sweeping arc, speeding at Ains with its surprising length. Ains blocked it with his right-hand greatsword, and his eyes went wide with surprise. This was because the tail had turned at a right angle, using the greatsword as a fulcrum of sorts. Exclamation point. He swung his greatsword to the side, aiming to cast away the tail which was on his sword. However, he was a moment too late, and the tail scraped the back plate of his armor, sending an impact through his body. Due to a racial skill, an attack like this would not have hurt Ains even if the tail had struck him dead on. However, if one thought of this as a first-person shooter game, then he had made a great mistake. Now, we are 1 for 1. A mere hamster, anger rose inside him. Then, let me try a ranged attack of my own. Having decided this, Ains firmly gripped his right-hand greatsword. As Ains was preparing his attack, the wise king of the forest spoke, with heartfelt respect, "That armor, 'tis truly amazing. Nay, thy strength and swordplay are both breathtaking to behold. Thou art truly a superlative warrior. Art thou a man of fame in human society?" The strength faded from his right hand. In a somewhat disappointed tone, he asked, "Do I look like a warrior to you? Why dost thou ask? What wouldst thou resemble, save a warrior? Mayhaps thou might be better addressed as a knight?" The wise king of the forest, "Well, you've been misnamed. Or rather, everything started going wrong once I discovered you were a giant hamster." Indeed, it was hard to think of Ains as a magic caster in this suit of full-plate armor. Still, he had hoped that something with the grand title of Wise King of the Forest would at least have noticed something amiss, or showed some sign that it could see through his disguise. The Wise King of the Forest must have thought that Ains' magic immunity was simply resisting the spell through sheer force of will. Granted, special defenses like resistance and immunity were practically the same thing in Yggdrasil, but at least it should have tried to act like a proper sage. In the end, it was completely undeserving of the title of Wise King. Maybe if it had been called a giant Jungarian hamster, he would not have held such high hopes. Whoever called him a wise king must have had something wrong with him. It was a mislabeling, false advertising. Having lost the will to fight, Ains powerlessly lowered the greatswords in his hands. "What art thou doing? Could it possibly be, dost thou intend to yield before the battle is decided? Come at this one with all thy strength. This is a duel to the death." The words from the angry wise king of the forest chipped away at Ains' heart. Fortunately, great emotional upheavals were suppressed immediately, so he still had some strength remaining. "That's enough." Speaking with a cold, crystal-clear voice, Ains pointed his right-hand greatsword at the wise king of the forest and activated his skill. Despair Aura V. Since its instant death effect was too strong, he decided to reduce its potency and instead activated Despair Aura IS Fear effect. A cold, soul-chilling vapor gusted out from Ains the moment that mass of cold air washed over the wise king of the forest. Every single one of its hairs stood on end, and it rolled over with surprising speed. All he could see was its silvery fur, and its soft, defenseless belly. "Craven. This one yields to thee." In the end it was just a beast. As he muttered tiredly in response, Ains walked over to the wise king of the forest, observing its vulnerable belly, and then considered what he should do next. It's a creature of this world, so chasing it away would be a shame. Sadly, it's just a hamster, so should I raise it as a pet, at the very least, I should make use of its corpse. One of Ains' job classes was called Necromancer. It was a class that allowed one to turn a corpse into an undead slave, though the quality of the undead produced depended on the species of the corpse. The best corpses were those of powerful beings like dragons, while human corpses could become zombies and skeletons. Then, given that the wise king of the forest did not exist in Yggdrasil, what sort of undead would its corpse make? A wise king of the forest zombie. "Shall we kill it?" a cheery voice rang out. Ains turned and found that Aura had mysteriously appeared beside Narbril. If you kill it, I'd like its hide. It looks like it would make a great pelt. Ains lowered his head and looked straight at the wise king of the forest, who was looking at him with moist, tear-filled eyes. Its whiskers twitched as it waited fearfully for its future to be decided. Just then, he suddenly recalled the words which he had exchanged with the wise king of the forest. Ains recalled the part about friends. Ains found that he was hesitating. Then, with a sigh, he made his decision.